Did you ever play a game on your phone or tablet? Those mobile games are a wonderland of rainbows and unicorns. Everything is free to play. But for some reason, the producers of those games still make plenty of money. How can that be? We will find out today when we discuss dark patterns in gaming. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today we will discuss dark patterns in gaming. Now, first of all, what are dark patterns anyway? We had an earlier video about dark patterns on the internet where we encounter them frequently. For example, when we face those cookie messages on websites, where we often select to accept all the cookies, even though we don't actually want companies to track our activities on the internet, because they employ plenty of little tricks to make us make the choice they want instead of the choice that is beneficial to ourselves. And those little tricks, those are called dark patterns. The term was coined by one Harry Bricknell, who runs the website Deceptive Design, formerly darkpattern.org. Now, there are plenty of dark patterns widely used on the internet, and we also have them in gaming. Now, why is that? We have to have a brief look at the history of gaming and current trends here. Now, first of all, in the past, when I was young and still had plenty of hair, games were usually created this way. The company spent a couple of years making one and then they ended up in a nice box on the shelves in the store. There you bought them for plenty of money. Nowadays it's about 50, 60, maybe 70 euros for a full price game. So that's a lot of pocket money for kids and teenagers. So they were expensive, but once you've bought them, this was everything. There were no additional costs. You were done with the transaction. Now, this business model still exists today, but the games made and sold in this way are getting fewer, and those aren't the projects the companies make the most money nowadays. Now, there was a time in between where MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games, were a big trend and biggest business. And there we had a subscription model. So people had to pay on a monthly basis, a small fee, to continue playing the game. One of the earliest well-known and successful games of that kind was Ultima Online, and the overall most well-known and most successful MMORPG is probably World of Warcraft. Now, this model quickly stopped working because every company wanted to get into it, wanted to make an MMORPG and collect subscription fees. But obviously, once the player base spread among dozens and hundreds of MMORPGs, it was very difficult for a single MMORPG to really to really earn money and not make losses. And nowadays there are very few MMORPGs left that still have a mandatory subscription. Now, the big trend that is popular nowadays, the thing everybody wants to get in on, is games as a service. So games are marketed as a service that runs for a couple of years, and throughout those years the company wants to make a lot of money from it. The players are supposed to spend a lot of money on the game. And how do they spend it? The important term here is microtransactions. So instead of paying a lot of money one time, like in the old days, you pay very small amounts, but frequently and over a long time. So in the end, you end up spending even more. What do you spend this money for? For little in-game things. For example, you might buy an additional car in a racing game, a new costume for your avatar in a role-playing game. Maybe you spend some time to make things more comfortable or easier, to get a little advantage over other players, for little quality of life things like being able to carry more items, things like that. And you are supposed to make plenty of such purchases over a long time. Mobile games, games for phones and tablets, are very often free to play, so the game itself is given away and all the income is generated using microtransactions and also advertising. Advertising is also an important source of income, especially for mobile games. Now the problem is, players aren't that happy to spend a lot of money. In the end, only a only a minority of players will actually use microtransactions and will actually make purchases. And there are only very few players who will really invest large amounts of money into a game. There is the term whales you might have heard before. A whale is a player who invests a lot of money into a single game, like thousands or several thousands of dollars. So those are very valuable. So apart from using dark patterns to make people spend more money, companies also use dark patterns to make players play the game more frequently, for longer time, longer sessions, and so on, because you need a very big player base to end up with a lot of players who actually buy stuff and plenty of whales who are especially valuable to you. So first of all, we want players to spend money on the game, and preferably a lot of that. How do we do that? Now, the first trick is to create a fluent transition from playing the game for free to spending money. And there is a great example for that on the Deceptive Design website. They show a mobile game where right from the get-go, it is established in the user interface that a big green button is what you want to tap, is what you need to tap to continue. Right when you start the game, you tap the big green button to get into things. When you finish a level, you tap the big green button to proceed to the next level. So from the get-go, the player is conditioned to tap the big green button without thinking about it a lot. Now, at some point, you will reach a menu where the big green button will take you to a purchase. Of course, there is also an alternative button, but that is small and not very obvious. That one is hidden in plain sight, while the big green button obviously is right in your face. And tricks like that are very, very, very common. Now, the next trick frequently used is an in-game premium currency. So if I want to buy, for example, this additional car for my racing game, I don't just buy it using real money, but I first buy an in-game currency using real money, and then I use this in-game currency to buy the car. Now you might wonder, why this additional step? Isn't it cumbersome? Well, it is, but the trick is, the advantage is, if you have this in-game currency, it becomes more difficult for the player to figure out what in-game items are actually worth and how much they actually cost. Now imagine you have some in-game currency, super special coins, and you can buy 600 of those for $5. So what exactly is one super special coin worth? Can you quickly figure it out? And if the car costs let's say 250 special coins, how much is the car in real money, in real dollars? Now this is difficult for the player to figure out on the fly, and it gets even more difficult because this premium currency usually gets a bit cheaper if you buy a lot of it. So you might get 600 super special coins for $5, but if you spend $10 at once, you will get, instead of 1,200, you will get 1,500. So it gets cheaper the more you spend. And again, this variable course of variable relation of real money to in-game currency makes it even more difficult to figure out what an item actually costs in real money. So players are more likely to spend more because they aren't aware of how much actual money they are spending. And another similar trick is that the prices of the in-game items don't match these currency packages very well. Now, let's say you have this car for 240 and you buy another car that's also 240. So you've spent 480, but you've bought 600 super special coins, so you are left with 120. What do you do with that 120? There is no item that is that cheap, so you can spend it. But we have an aversion to waste this remaining currency. We have a waste aversion. So we think, oh well, I have 120 coins left. I should spend them. It's real money after all. It would be so bad to waste it. But in order to spend it, you have to buy additional currency. Yeah, and then you obviously understand what the idea here is. One especially troublesome way of getting players to spend more money are the so-called loot boxes that again and again pop up in the media, that are frequently discussed because they are very problematic. If you buy a loot box, you spend real money or in-game currency on an item, but you don't know beforehand what you will get. It is random. It is a game of chance where you can get a really great item, but you can also get a not so great item. It depends on your luck. And obviously, this pretty much resembles gambling. But gambling is something that should not be made available to minors, but obviously games are often played by children and teenagers who have not yet reached legal age. So this is a highly problematic area. The country of Belgium, for example, has decided that loot boxes are in fact gambling and that the rules about gambling apply to them, so they cannot be sold to minors. I will talk about that a bit more later. So we successfully used dark patterns to make players spend more money, but we still need to make players spend more time on the game, play more frequently, play more often, play for a longer time. And again, we can employ dark patterns to do so. Here, it is a bit more difficult to distinguish between legitimate design choices and actual dark patterns. The transition is a bit fluent. First of all, there is a bit of a fluent transition between classic and legitimate game design and dark patterns. For example, a lot of games require a certain amount of repetitive tasks, repetitive effort. This is in games called grinding. Let's say, for example, in a role-playing game, you want your character to reach a higher level and you have to fight plenty of monsters to do so. Or you want to get an item that is rare, but it only drops very rarely, so you have to again defeat a lot of monsters to have a higher chance of getting it. So you have to put in some time and perform some repetitive tasks. Now, some games rely on this a lot, some have very little grinding, but usually it is a matter of game design. The problem is, if it would be super easy to advance to the next level, it would not be very rewarding. If the item would be very easy to get, if it would drop each time you defeat a monster, it wouldn't be a rare item, it wouldn't be anything special. So designers have to balance the effort required to achieve something with the sense of accomplishment the player will feel when they finally achieve it. However, things get more difficult if stuff like free-to-play and service games enter the picture. Here, for example, we have a popular dark pattern that is called pay to skip. Let's say you have a game that has a lot of grinding. It is a kind of role-playing game. You have rare items, you want to reach higher levels, and so on. Now, if this is a service game and includes microtransactions, the company might say, oh well, we make this grinding a bit more bothersome, a bit more lengthy, so players will really not want to do it, and then we offer them to skip it or to make it easier if they pay some money. This is quite popular and widespread, especially in mobile games. Pay to skip is also used in regard to waiting time. And again, often it is legitimate game design that you have to wait when performing certain actions. For example, if you are in a strategy game and the barbarian hordes are already attacking, it is a bit late to place watchtowers. And in such a game, usually a watchtower will require some time to be built. However, in a classic game, this is usually a couple of seconds, but in a mobile game, it can be a couple of hours. And again, the idea is to offer the player to pay some money to reduce the waiting time to have stuff built right away. Another area where the transition isn't really clear is between dark patterns and good community service. Now, a lot of games, especially service games and online games, have some kinds of in-game events. For example, an MMORPG might have a special event at Halloween, or a game that is very competitive might have special events where special competitions take place, things like that. So you have a special content or whatnot in the game at a special time. This might be 1 or 2 weeks, it might also be just a single weekend. Now, there are also events that are longer. Those are usually called seasons. Those can last for a couple of months, where you have special items, for example, that you can only acquire during this season, and there is maybe something special. Maybe the leaderboard is reset when the season ends, and when the season changes, the special items, whatnot, you can acquire change as well. Now, obviously, this is nice at first glance because the company puts some effort into the game, organizes those special events, prepares special items you can acquire there and whatnot. But it also produces some pressure onto the player. Here we have a dark pattern called playing by appointment. You don't get to decide yourself when you want to play the game, like I want to play it now, I want to play it Tuesday evening, but you have to play it according to a schedule created by the company. There is a special event on the weekend, so you better play the game on the weekend. And as I said, those special events usually often include special rewards, special items you can get only there. So if you don't play at the weekend where the special event takes place, you will end up not getting the item. And here, the games and the companies clearly use our fear of missing out, FOMO for short, the fear of not getting something, missing out on something. So we might end up thinking, oh well, the season ends in 2 weeks. I should better acquire this special item before the season ends, so I should better play a bit more. Oh, there is a special event on the weekend. I should better play the game a lot on the weekend, so I can get a special reward there as well. So we are tricked into playing more. 2 important mechanisms at play here are first, endowed progress, where the game basically tries to create tasks for us, where the game tries to get onto our to-do list. Well, I have to do my tax declaration, I have to finish whatever for work. Oh, and I better play the game some more before the season ends. And another mechanism is endowed value. The longer we play the game, the more we participate in those special events, the more likely we are to continue doing so. For example, I might think, oh well, I played the first season and got the special item. I played the second season, got the special item. I played the third season and got the special item. It would be a shame not to do it in the 4th season as well. Or I took part in all those past events, I better not miss out on the next one. Those of you who have watched the video about the sunk cost fallacy will probably notice some parallels there. So there are plenty of tricks to make us play more. A third category of dark patterns I would like to mention briefly are social dark patterns, patterns that rely on the interaction between players. Now, here again, it is very difficult to draw the line between what is legitimate and what is a dark pattern. For example, if you consider MMORPGs, games where a lot of people play together online, they are based on cooperation. So you cannot just go by yourself and finish the big quest and defeat the big boss. But you have to team up with other players. You have to create a group where different players take on different specialized roles that support each other, and then together you can do all of the important things. Now, if you just team up with some random people that are there at the moment, things might not work as smoothly because you don't know each other. You are not used to playing with each other. Some people might be assholes and whatnot. So it usually works out better if you play with the same group again and again. If you have a certain group of friends or online friends who always play together, then things will be much easier and more fun. But of course, this creates a certain social responsibility isn't exactly right, but yeah, well, you know what I mean. All my friends will play in the evening. It will be too bad if it couldn't happen just because I don't come along as well, so I better do. So there is a certain social pressure here, but it's difficult to say if this really is the company's fault, because it is something I'd say is inherent in the game's design. If you want this cooperation between players, you will always end up with a certain degree of this social pressure. However, things are way more clear if you consider, for example, games that pressure players into advertising the game. For example, games where you are asked to tell your friends, to recruit your friends, and you will get a small reward if they play the game as well, like a pyramid scheme, or games that frequently ask you to post your accomplishments in the game on social media, post it to Facebook, Instagram, or whatnot. This is clearly not very nice. Now you might wonder, if so many questionable practices and dark patterns are used, don't those companies face legal troubles? It's really difficult for dark patterns because the basic idea of dark patterns is basically to stay just inside of the law, so we can always say, yeah, well, it is totally legitimate, it is all within the boundaries of the law, but at the same time use every trick available to your advantage to make people do as you want. But nonetheless, there are a few examples where companies faced trouble. One I mentioned earlier was that Belgium declared that loot boxes actually are gambling and they have to follow the rules for gambling, so you can't make them available to minors. Now this led to companies disabling the loot box feature for Belgium in some games. They always don't distribute some games in Belgium anymore, or some games were not even released in Belgium in the first place since that decision. So it had some effect on big companies, big games. However, according to a recent study, this Belgium regulation of loot boxes being gambling is actually not strictly enforced. In the study, the researchers checked out the 100 most popular iPhone games in May 2021, and they noticed that 82% of those had some kind of loot box feature, but those games and those companies didn't face any legal trouble due to Belgian law. Another example I encountered concerns a fine by the Federal Trade Commission placed upon by the American Federal Trade Commission placed upon Epic Games, the company that is behind the popular online shooter Fortnite. And it was a rather big fine of $275. And the reason included dark patterns. Now, there were two main topics. The first was protection of data and privacy. And it concerned kids because Epic Games allowed children to share their personal data without consent of the legal guardian, and this is not legal according to American law. And the second point also concerned in-game purchases, microtransactions. Here again, a problem was that minors were able to make purchases without consent from the legal guardian again, which is not allowed. And also, and here dark patterns are also a part of the issue. The FTC complained that it was possible to make purchases by accident, and that the user interface was designed in a way that it was especially easy to make a purchase by accident. For example, you might just resume the game after it went to standby, and during that process you might make a purchase by accident. So dark patterns were part of the reasons this fine was imposed. If you would like some further information about dark patterns in regard to games, I recommend the website Dark Pattern Games. It has a list of dark patterns that appear in games, so you will find some more examples there. And you can also check which mobile games make use of dark patterns. Pretty much all of them, but you can check which games make especially heavy use of dark patterns and which are a bit more trustworthy, so you can figure out which games are better choices for you or for your kids. And if you are interested in dark patterns in general, you might want to check out our video about dark patterns on the internet. By the way, I've heard rumors that if you click the like button for 20 different videos on the Soft Skill channel, there will be a secret level. This probably only works if you have subscribed to the channel, but I don't really know. As I said, it's just a rumor. We will see each other in the next video. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.